Everybody joining me on the show first today, coming in last minute. Very appreciative of this. AJ Spurr. You can check him out over at the Roll Tide Wire. Of course, we have got to discuss Nick Saban retiring on Wednesday, announcing that retirement, shocking everybody. I'm sure it shocked this guy on the other end of the line. And joining me on the phone, like I said, is AJ Spurr, Roll Tide Wire. And AJ, I appreciate you coming on short notice and just wow. You always knew this was going to happen eventually, but still, the news was still stunning on Wednesday.
You know what? You're right. This was one of those things, and I was thinking to myself just a couple weeks ago as the season was coming to an end, when is it going to happen? You know, how will everybody react? What will, the Roll Tide Wire site, what would it be like? What's going to be the atmosphere in Tuscaloosa? There's so many questions that I had running through my mind. And now that it's happened, none of them were really answered, but even then, none of them are that important at this point. I think as soon as everybody heard the news, it wasn't a, flow of questions that needed to be answered as much as it was just a realization that, whoa, this inevitable day that we all knew would come finally came. So what now? So it's interesting to see how everything's working in Tuscaloosa and behind the scenes, especially how you and I had talked off air about different programs having different, types of coaching searches and how the fans react. So this is uncharted territory for most Alabama fans. Well, not most, but many Alabama fans. So it's just interesting to see how everything here is shaping out, and we could even have an answer very, very soon.
Yes, let's hope not before this podcast goes up. Let's hope at least they could hold off on that. Just help me out a little bit on that. Yeah, you see, and look, I'm 37, so I remember pre-Saban. But like you said, there's a lot of fans out there, the younger fans, like that first generation of Alabama fans that just they only know Nick Saban as the head coach. Kind of very similar how there was a big bulk of the fan base that only knew Bear Bryant way back in the day. But, older fans or people around my age do remember the Mike Shula years, the Mike Price debacle, Dennis Franchione 2 years, Mike DuBose. Gene Stallings was kind of like that gap between the Bear. They had some hiccups there too as well. But it is one of them interesting things for, like you said, a lot of Alabama fans. This is on uncharted territory because all they've known is Nick Saban.
And, there's that and the fact that for Alabama, this is the first time there's been a coaching search in the era of social media. Mm-hmm. So while Alabama fans have had the privilege over the last 17 years to kind of sit back and watch other fan bases squirm around, looking under every rock, nothing going unturned when it comes to trying to find an answer. The flight tracker people, who I absolutely love, by the way. For Alabama, with one of the biggest fan bases in all of college football, this has taken over, at least for me. I don't know about you, Phillip. My social media is nothing but Nick Saban and or who replaces Nick Saban. So this is just wild to see.
Yeah, I've had people I know that are Alabama fans have called me a lot, asking what I think, because people know, I'm an Auburn writer, but I keep up with pretty much a lot of this football stuff, college, high school, pro, whatever, intrigues me. And it is kind of wild. It's taking up a lot of my time scrolling on X and Facebook and all other stuff, just kind of wanting to see who the next guy was going to be. And, we can jump into that too as well. Interesting names that popped up. It seemed like Dan Lanning was the first name everybody was really jumping on. Speculation with him. Mm-hmm. I know there was obviously a false report that he was in Tuscaloosa yesterday and today. I'm like, wow, that's really quick working. But hey, look, as a guy that covers Auburn, I know how these things go. I know you have to be patient. It's one of the things you can't get too excited. You just got to wait. Wait for the athletic or wait for the official announcement. But actually, let's backtrack. Let's not go into the candidates quite yet. Just the timing of it all. You see reports that Nick Saban, he was still working, interviewing receiver coaches potentially. He was at a teleconference, SEC coaches, all that stuff. And then we see the news break. What was your opinions on just kind of like the timing of it all?
So at first, seeing the report that he had shown up to work just as every other day, was on the teleconference, was conducting interviews, and that he announced it at a pre-planned, already existing meeting that was there for him to address the team on what I believe is the first day of classes on campus in Tuscaloosa. So to me at first, it was a shock. This was an abrupt, spur of the moment thing where Nick Saban realized, you know what, it's time to just hang it up and go out right now, which albeit feels very Nick Saban-esque when you think about, he doesn't want this, big tour, anything grandiose. He just said, I'm not feeling it anymore. We'll go ahead and just pack it up and call it a day. After, having roughly 24 hours now to think it over and reading and hearing some of what he's had to say himself on, the whole situation, Phillip, what I've gathered is that over this past season, he somewhere along the line made the decision that this was probably going to be it for him. And he cited, his age, possible health concerns, and just the fact that, Nick Saban is a person. He enjoys life. And he said it himself. These are 14-hour-long work days that he can no longer keep up with. And he only wants to do things if he's going to be the absolute best at it. And being the head coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide at this point, if you're not able to put in 100%, 24/7, then you're not going to be able to maintain, being the best program in all of college football, which leads me to believe that this decision was made a while ago. He carried it over into the playoffs. He held on to it until the ending of, the season with the national championship coming to a close. And he probably only told family and what I would assume to be, or who I would assume to be Greg Byrne, because I know a lot of people thought, well, they got to have contingency plans in place. They would just immediately pass the torch the second he retires. Well, a lot of people have to think. Everybody's got a mouth, Phillip. People love to talk. If they were to have reached out to, whoever's on their short list of candidates and said, hey, this is going to be it for Nick. We're gonna go ahead and move ahead and interview a couple people. We're interested in you. That would spread like absolute wildfire. Now you have Nick Saban news about retiring in the middle of the 2023 season. You have the recruiting trail falling apart on Alabama, and just fans in general would be losing their minds for the remainder of the season. I don't think that they told agents. I don't think anybody knew except for the only people that needed to know. And as far as that contingency plan goes for the next coach, I think all they have is or was a short list of coaches that maybe Greg Byrne and or Nick Saban compiled. And they're just, going down the list now. And the 72-hour thing that everybody's been seeing in reports, that Alabama would have a new head coach hired and named within 72 hours of Nick Saban retiring. We're already 24 hours, a little bit over that at this point of recording. And, nobody's been named, but 48 hours remain, and Alabama has the power and the money to get whoever it is that they want, and assuming that person is willing to leave, which is why I think that 72 hours may seem a bit ambitious to a lot of people. But I know that Saban, Byrne, and the rest of the administration at the Alabama Department of Athletics, they're comfortable knowing, somebody on that list is going to say yes, and they'll be able to get them, no matter the price, no matter the buyout, no matter what it takes. They'll get somebody that they want. They will not settle.
And we talk about timing and obviously the 14-hour days. And look, it's even more of a grind being a college football coach now with NIL, transfer portal, and all that other stuff. Do you think maybe that also had a factor in this with him retiring? Because, he has not come out and ever said he's against those things, and I don't think he is. But he has also, I don't know how many times, AJ, I've heard Nick Saban say this, is this what we want college football to be? He has said that multiple times. Do you think that had a factor?
I think it would be silly to assume or infer that it wasn't a factor in determining, whether or not Nick Saban was going to retire. We have to be honest here, though he didn't, like you just said, come out and say that he hated these things and didn't want them to be a part of the game. He warned college football of the dangers of those things. And we also got to remember, being a head coach of a college football program is not just, coaching the players. You are the general manager of, this collegiate program. And when you're at Alabama, the power and the standard that comes with that includes being a general manager of massive proportions, working the transfer portal, working the recruiting trail, figuring out NIL just in general, how it works. I mean, Alabama's going after the biggest and best recruits there are every single year. And with NIL now, they're learning how to, play the system, get their money, which good for them. That's what they're supposed to be doing, I guess, in a name, image, and likeness era of college football. But I think for Nick Saban, it didn't push him out. I don't think it ran him out. But I do think that the transfer portal and NIL expedited that process purely because of the amount of energy that it would require for him to maintain, excellence on the recruiting trail and the portal while also figuring out and dealing with NIL. So I do think that it played a role. I don't think it pushed him. I don't think it forced him out. But it would be silly to not say that it had a hand in his retirement here.
And lastly, before we get into who could be the potential replacement for Nick Saban, and those are words I never thought I would say behind a microphone. It just, feel like the day would ever get here, but it's here. So obviously on Thursday, and everybody listening, we're recording this Thursday evening, almost at 6 o'clock when we hit the record button. And just looking at some stuff he said, that he is still going to be around, still involved with the university. He's still going to be there in Tuscaloosa. He'll be there for players, and he's still working. I mean, the man just doesn't know how to quit. Now, I look at that. I might be a little devil's advocate here. I look at that. Could that be a positive or negative? I think it could be both. Him there is awesome. It's great. It could be a real sounding board for the next coach coming in, particularly a younger coach. And also just, kind of ease things, too, around the fan base, around the program. But also at the same time, could that be a problem with the coach who's coming in if he's not connected to Saban, looking over his shoulder? I only say all that just because as a guy, again, everybody knows I cover Auburn for Last One College Football. Two different situations I know, but Pat Dye had a shadow over the Auburn program because he was there. He had an office, blah, blah, blah. What is your feeling on that, Nick Saban still being involved with the program after retirement?
I think that the cons, if we're just weighing pros and cons here, I think that the cons are very easy to see, or the possible cons, that is. You have a coach who everybody that's being considered is pretty young, right? So you have what would be a young coach overseeing this behemoth of a program with the guy whose shoes you were filling, possibly breathing down your neck, critiquing everything you do. And with Nick Saban, a lot of people consider him synonymous with perfection or as close to it as you could possibly get when it comes to college football. If you do not match that or come close to it, people are going to be calling for your job. People are going to, ask why Saban isn't there. There's going to be people also claiming, whoever is in charge, that they are just a puppet for Nick Saban to use so that he doesn't have to be, as hands-on as he would have been should he still be the head coach. There's going to be negatives no matter how you look at it. That being said, I think that the positives outweigh those cons. I mentioned it on social media that having Nick Saban still be active with the program and even involved now in an administrative role, this is going to benefit Alabama greatly on the recruiting trail and the transfer portal, because now not only do you still have Nick Saban there, able to speak to, able to mentor, able to work out with these players and practice, be there on the practice field. You're also going to have a head coach who, if it's any one of the names that I'm sure we'll discuss here in a second, having that coach plus Nick Saban present, I mean, if Nick Saban alone was enough, this is just making the deal even sweeter for any recruit that's considering Alabama. And not just that, Phillip, but I really do think that this may, and I'm probably going to wish I hadn't said this may give us some insight as to who is, strongly being considered for the job. Because if we're looking at Mike Norvell versus Steve Sarkisian, and I'm not giving any predictions right now, I would say, which one of those two has a history with Nick Saban? Which one of those two would be most comfortable with Nick Saban on the field while they're taking over as head coach? To me, that's a simple answer. Now, I don't think that this is going to tell us who is the coach, especially between those two. But I really do think that if you have a former, Alabama coordinator, assistant, somebody that was a part of the Nick Saban coaching tree, I think that this would make the transition as seamless as possible with Saban actually being there.
And you mentioned his name, Mike Norvell, which, look, I don't mean this as a joke. I'm actually being serious. I think if he became the next Alabama head coach, Florida State fans would go scorched earth because, one, they blame Alabama for not being in the playoffs, and now take away their head coach. I would have to seriously pray for the people down in Tallahassee if that happened. I've always felt like, and I saw Greg McElroy said that there's pretty much zero chance of this happening. I've always felt like Lane Kiffin would be the perfect guy just because Lane Kiffin does not care. I feel like Lane Kiffin would want that job more than Alabama would want him to. So that's also my opinion. But another one that's been out there, Kalen DeBoer. When you look at a lot of these names have been mentioned, even Dabo Swinney. No, he's not connected to Nick Saban, but he played at Alabama. So there's that connection there. Dan Lanning, even though we can cross his name off, the Kirby connection, the Saban connection, that's there. We talk about Lane Kiffin and Sarkisian, former office coordinators. Kalen DeBoer, what's kind of like your thoughts on his name being on that list, or what people are floating out there as potential candidates to replace Nick Saban?
Look, Kalen DeBoer is an excellent coach. I think that he has done wonders in his short time with Washington. He led them to, the playoffs. He's led them now to a national title appearance. I don't think that DeBoer would be the worst candidate out of everybody that, we've really seen named. However, I'm not convinced DeBoer, despite how often we've seen his name thrown around here, especially today, Thursday, that is. I find it a hard time, or I have a hard time believing that Alabama's first choice to follow Nick Saban would be a coach 2 years removed from the Group of Five, whose 2 years as a Power Five head coach hasn't really produced any impressive recruiting classes, and somebody who's coming down now all the way from the Pacific Northwest. I'm not saying that all of these criteria have to be met, Phillip, but it just seems to me like he's a great coach that has created a winning culture at Washington. I just don't know if that's going to directly translate into what Alabama needs in a head coach. We're talking about some of the best recruiters in the country being in the SEC, and now even more so with Oklahoma and Texas joining the conference. Somebody, whoever is at the helm for Alabama, has to be somebody who can not just recruit well, but can out-recruit some of the best top-tier recruiters in all the land. And as things stand with DeBoer, I do not believe he is, able to do that at this point. I don't think that he's wholly incapable of doing it. I'm just saying currently, and especially considering the other candidates that have been named, DeBoer would not be my first choice to fill the Nick Saban head coaching vacancy at Alabama.
Well, and see his name, Ed. Yeah, I know Mike Norvell doesn't have a connection to Nick Saban either, but still, he's in the Southeast, and look, Florida State recruits like really like an SEC team. So that wouldn't be much of a, just from a culture, going from Florida State, Alabama wouldn't be as tough. But yeah, with Kalen DeBoer coming from Washington, Alabama, no connection to the SEC, that would be a tough situation. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. Perhaps through the weekend, we'll know who the next Alabama head coach. I'm still going to say, please, Alabama, do not name a coach until this podcast is out on Friday morning. That would be very beneficial to me. But anyways, AJ, I appreciate you coming on here. I told you 10, 15 minutes. We've gone 20. I feel like we could probably go another 20 on this conversation. But anyways, I appreciate you jumping on last minute, as I said when I introduced you there. But man, if anybody out there wanting to follow you online, the listeners and viewers, obviously the coverage at Roll Tide Wire for the search for the next head coach of Alabama, where can they find you and where can they find the website?
Well, they can go ahead and find the website, which is covering all things Alabama football and Nick Saban's retirement and the eventual Nick Saban replacement at rolltidewire.usatoday.com. And they can check me out on social media on X at Spurr FM, SPURR-FM, like the radio dial.
All right, sounds good, AJ. I'm sure we'll have another conversation in the weeks to come. I have a feeling. But anyways, I appreciate you coming on the show, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime down the road.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.